It's like herding cats. It's a mission that is nearly impossible because every cat has mind of its own. And at the moment in energy transition in Europe, I also feel that all the 27 countries have their own playbooks. They have their own mind, how to do stuff. They call the same things different. They have rules that are totally different. And yet we should be one.
Martin, welcome to the show. Before we get started, maybe let's start with the most important question. So most people are thinking about building more solar, more wind, more batteries, but you guys are at Fusebox, you're thinking about this a little bit differently. Why is it such a game changer to focus on the demand response and flexibility instead of adding more capacity?
It's a great question. We already have enough capacity. Of course, you always can have more, but the problem at the moment is rather a coordination than having more capacity, using it smartly, all the things that we already have. If we just think about how much negative price hours we have had already in Spain, in the first half of this year, somewhere around 400, I think. It kind of signals that we have a problem of coordination. It's not a problem of solar. It's not a problem of renewables. And I don't like this kind of narrative that some people are pushing. It's a problem of coordination, how and when to use those renewables and when to use, let's say, classical or old-time power plants and to make it work together. Because I also don't believe that in 5 years it will be 100% renewable. It doesn't make any sense. But we also shouldn't stop building renewables. Coordination, flexibility, and sometimes also demand response is important. Through that, we actually achieve the resilience of European grid. It's important to me. It's not only about flowers and trees and sustainability, also about how resilient the Europe is, how independent the Europe is. So that we need more renewables. And even if you talk about this kind of old-time energy production facilities, then the actual energy comes from some other countries that we don't control. And we give away this kind of independence. So even though it seems very safe to burn more coal or oil or gas, quite often it comes from somebody else who is maybe friendly at the moment, but not friendly in 5 or 10 years.
Indeed. And I mean, you touched on a couple of key points there about both geopolitics, and also where that energy comes from. That's a key question to ask. But we were talking before the show and you actually dressed for the occasion. You have a quite interesting t-shirt. Maybe on the note of coordination, can you give us the story behind the t-shirt?
Yes, I'm a huge fan of my t-shirts and they have some meaning behind that. And today you see a lot of cats. I think it's visible, yes? And It comes from an expression that I learned from my previous UK colleagues. It's like herding cats. It's a mission that is nearly impossible because every cat has mind of its own. And at the moment in energy transition in Europe, I also feel that all the 27 countries have their own playbooks. They have their own mind, how to do stuff. They call the same things different. They have rules that are totally different. And yet we should be one. So very good analogy I read last night was, what would you think if every country in Europe would have slightly different euro? Would it make sense? Nobody would argue that it's logical thing. So herding cats is something that is energy transition in Europe at the moment, but it's possible. It's not impossible. You can bow the cats, you can agree on some things and to have this kind of a more unified market. And even if you can't do that, then maybe Fusebox and other players who build this kind of smart layer all over the rules, then maybe those can make it happen quicker. So that's why maybe you need this kind of independent players that help to translate all the 27 dialects. Yeah, that's the story behind my shirt.
For sure. And I mean, those cats are also almost 27 as I was counting. But you touched on a couple of very interesting points here. So firstly, the regulatory environment and the rule setting. We have kind of a European or pan-European framework of how everything should be working, but then everything is being translated into each individual member state's language, and then it becomes complicated. So on one hand, the regulation could be a real force and wind in our sail to propel forward. On the other hand, it's also quite limiting. So That's something that's quite difficult to balance. And that's why we need smart solutions like you guys at Fusebox to help us balance that regulatory and nationwide framework to basically have a more level playing field. You guys are based out of Estonia and you grew quite pan-European already. What made you guys focus on the software side of things versus traditional market dynamics?
Yes, the one thing that when we started like 10 years ago, we wanted to be just a better aggregator who does demand response in an awesome way. Then Tarvar, our co-founder, and others started building software to support day-to-day operations. But then we started facing those different hurdles that you need to actually fight when you enter every new market. So we didn't want to do it only in Estonia. We wanted to do it all over the Europe. But the licensing, what entities do you need? What people do you need in every country? Again, 27 different rules. But at the same time, we saw that there are not too many of this kind of very neutral software providers who would help you with all of those technical things. So you can focus on business and regulatory things in your own country. So because the technical part is quite extensive also. And then we found that actually we could be that help because we have had experience in several countries when starting this kind of better aggregation business. But it was something that we saw that making complexity simple on a local or pan-European side, on a technical side, would give a huge value to those local BRPs or PV park owners or whatever. So yes, through our own pain, we understood where the gap is. And that's why we decided to go to SaaS, not compete with our customers, not to be traders ourselves, portfolio managers ourselves, but rather creating this kind of toolkit that can be used depending on the needs, because the players are also very different in very different countries. They need different things. So yeah, maybe that's a long story.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, so you guys basically decided to focus on building the tools or the toolkit instead of actually doing the thing on the local markets, right?
Yeah. And that's also because I feel that in the energy market, there is a lot of mistrust. Every player wants to maximize their relationship with their customers. They don't want to share the data. And the classical aggregator or VPP provider usually, or VPP software provider, also had their side business as a portfolio manager, trader themselves. So it would mean that you will give away your customer relationship, your customer data, and so on. And as I feel that there is quite a lot of mistrust at the moment between players due to business reasons only. Not that they don't like each other. That's also why it makes sense to have this kind of a neutral player, like we're like Switzerland, but just without the mountains and with automation.
Very cool. And I think it's the right approach. You know, if you can facilitate the energy transition and make those countries and companies move forward faster, it's definitely a win-win for everyone. And when we are talking about, you touched on the demand response side. Why do you think is that important? We mentioned a little bit the negative hours this year already, and we cannot really argue this year has been quite a difficult one for both solar and renewables in general. Why is the demand response side so important?
I don't even know what it's overlooked quite so much as it is, because everybody focuses on batteries and PVs, but the grid doesn't only consist of producing the energy. It also consists how we use it and when. Quite many commercial buildings or huge freezers that can freeze and chill a bit more when it's abundance of power, and chill a bit less and use a little bit less power where the power is super scarce. So it's a very important building block. So it's only about coordinating how we produce power and less coordinating how we use that power. That's the expertise that we have. So in Estonia, when we still were this kind of an aggregator, we built the extensive portfolio of demand response assets. And we know how to manage those assets, even if it's 1,000 small assets, but how to make it a force is differentiator that we have. I don't think too many people think about it, and it's super strange because it's like thinking about, I don't know, producing and not thinking about how to use it. And so it doesn't make sense, and I don't know why it is, and I'm so glad that we are here to teach it. we can't do everything, but we can teach how to do it, and then we can facilitate also how to use those demand response assets. And because quite many of our customers have hybrid sites, there is huge demand part on it. They have renewables part. Of course, they have a battery and storage that is super important. And how to coordinate it in a way that it's all done on site as the first thing, and then we have the grid when it's needed. Those kind of micro on-site optimizations, even if it's huge facilities, it would make more sense because the grids then would have less things to worry about because you consume the energy you produce at the same time. So, but as I see it now, quite many hybrid sites, they use the grid to the fullest, and the grid is a bit crumbling, as we see also with different events. So that's, again, a long answer. Yes.
It's the right answer indeed. And you mentioned a couple of key points here. First one is being the grid. Second one, hybridization of projects. This year, especially in 2025, I've been hearing the same thing over and over again from everybody. We need more hybrid projects. Let that be wind plus batteries, wind plus solar, connecting it to the grid. So that's the key word that keeps coming back. But also, it's a key point that you mentioned that communication is key. If you can facilitate the right communication between those assets, you are going to be much more efficient. You will put less strain on the grid, and you will have more efficient consumption. And that's something that we haven't been really thinking or focusing on about in Europe in the last couple of years. But now, since we reached quite a substantial amount of renewable production, it's going to be quite a challenge not to focus on this. So that's why it's quite important to have software like you guys to help solve that problem.
Yes. And also, we also should think about, I don't know, it's quite a side quest that I'm taking now, about what kind of storage technology we can use. We have a good storage technology at the moment, but what are those kind of different, like sand battery in Finland that is used to, just to heat the town when it's needed and heat the sand itself when it's cheap, or again, where it's abundance of renewables, or some storage solutions that use compressed air and are actually not on the ground, but are actually with the wind turbines in the sea and using the sea as a natural coolant for the system. Again, using the abundance of resources you have. The ocean is quite cold and you can heat quite many things up with compressed air there, and at the same time cool it with the water. And you don't need to even bring this to shore. It's there where it's needed. It can take this power when the grid can't take it and give this power when grid can take it. So I'm a big fan of new technologies. Of course, I understand they're at the moment maybe bit too POC still, too pilot and expensive. But at the same time, we can't rely all storage on this kind of usual traditional storage units that we have at the moment. We need to have some kind of alternatives. Again, things that we can build in Europe if needed.
For sure. And I mean, that's going to help us reach net zero much faster as well. I was just watching, the Tesla Master Plan 4 and the presentation of their mega packs. I mean, I think it's a brilliant technology that you can just more or less go and put 20 megawatt hour of storage on site in one day. You just bring the containers, everything is modular, everything can be connected. And the key point there is that they are really providing the full package, right? So they provide the hardware, the software, and also the service around it. So that's going to be really fast scaling in the next couple of years, for sure, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yes.
And when we are looking at different countries or different continents, what do you think are the lessons that we can learn in Europe from more advanced flexibility markets like the US or maybe Australia?
Very short answer. From Australia, it's speed, how fast you can engage different assets and how the infrastructure is built to support it. You have very clear rules what you need to do to be part of that. Maybe this kind of US, what I like, and maybe it's not in the same scale as in Europe, is that how you make this kind of smaller parts. I know that US states are not smaller parts. How do you make work within the state, within this kind of smaller pieces of the grid, so you consume locally, and the emphasis on how to make that happen. You don't need, again, strain the grid to push energy from France to Estonia. I know that it's actually not happening, Produce locally, use locally, and if needed, then make sure that the whole European grid is working and provide its help when it's even not maybe too convenient to you. So also to have this kind of independence thinking. But again, yes, US, how to consume local and how it's helped there and incentivized.
Indeed, and those things are going to be really key aspects of us reaching net zero in the next couple of years, hopefully sooner than later. And I actually read about a quite interesting project on the North Sea called the Elizabeth Islands, I think it's called. So basically, it's like a huge man-made wind farm project. It's already in construction phase, I think. It's just off the coast of Belgium, but they basically want to put it between Belgium, UK, and also the Nordics. So the cables will be connecting all of those. But it's a perfect example of how you could actually produce the electricity and basically send it from maybe one central point to where it's needed to be consumed.
Yes.
Yeah, and it comes back to the point that you mentioned as well, that coordination is key. And we in Europe, we are sometimes not the best at coordinating all of these assets, and we are not really utilizing them to the best of their abilities. And I think that's something that we can definitely work on, and we can put more emphasis on in the future.
Yeah, I don't think that it's good to dissolve into one Europe culturally. We are proud nations, we have our cultures and stuff, but energy, I wouldn't say it's such a strong thing in the culture. Yes, in some cases, if you talk about UK and how much tea they make and how many kettles can go on if something very linear is happening, let's say championships in football or something like that, there is a bit of a cultural part, yes, but energy is not as strong of a culture part as, let's say, huge singing festivals you have in Estonia or wine and food that you have in France. And let's keep those things separate and enjoy them as they are. But energy, I don't think that it's so strongly culture on or inherently nation-based that we couldn't coordinate. We should coordinate. We should be more open about making these coordinations also in the policy. And I like that this kind of initiatives like the joint data space for the energy and these kind of things we see happening, but as all the critics, it takes too much time. And that's why you need to have this kind of maybe more forward thinking, more quick and nimble companies to help. Because one thing that I believe that the European Commission and Brussels, they are just slow, not because they are not capable, but I think all the corner cases they are trying to think through. And in a sense, they come from a good place. You need to be sure that it works. You need to think about stuff, but you also can test in a very controlled environment some kind of things that you want to scale. So let's say this local consumption and local production that some smaller towns have tested out. It's a very good test lab how to do it on a bigger scale. So you don't need to do everything in this kind of waterfall a manner that you need to think for 7 years and then start building for another 7 years. But let's start with small controlled proof of concepts, local proof of concepts, and then try to figure out how to scale it in a efficient, but at the same time reliable way. So maybe, yes, all the thinkers and bureaucrats, they come from the right place, but they don't have the right tool set to move fast. And that's why maybe this kind of private companies need to help. And it's our duty to help. It's not, I don't like the narrative I read and feel in LinkedIn quite so much is how somebody is to blame, how somebody should do something about it. We should talk more about how we will do something and what are our next steps to help Europe. So, and to make more money also for the participants, because yes, geopolitical things are tensing up, but at the same time, those companies are not the charitable events. They're still the companies. So the other part we haven't talked too much about today is how to make money also in the process. So, and that's something that those private companies, again, can help with and make it faster.
Indeed, you touched upon a couple of things. I think there should be more initiatives on the sandboxing of certain projects and doing that as a real startup style, that you try and test something as a proof of concept. Then if it works, then you scale it, and then we would be much faster. And we can actually translate that into regulation and basically just run with what works and just throw away what doesn't. Ultimately, everybody would be making more revenue as well as a whole industry. So I think that's a very valid point that you mentioned. You actually talked about the revenue side as well, just at the end of the question. How do you guys actually help operators access new markets or maybe generate new revenue streams across Europe?
The one thing is quite easy, this kind of on-site optimization. It's at first not about earning more revenue, but actually cutting costs by being smart. And it's okay when you have one type of assets, then you have one interface to deal with. Let's say you have one battery or something like that. It's totally fine. And I think this kind of user interfaces that these types of hardware have are sufficient, but nobody has one asset anymore. And it becomes tricky when you have several this kind of environments that you need to make work together. And they're not designed to work together. I don't know why. There's too many of them. And that's what the first thing that we help with. We connect all your assets and your demand assets also in one easily controllable environment when you can set rules. So you can make sure that assets take into account other assets and their functionalities. That's the first thing. So it's not only about making money, it's also saving on cost. But the second thing that is very, very attractive, you can earn as much as you save from different ancillary markets. But what they can do is control their assets and make those assets maybe visible to the trader as one asset. They still, as asset owners, have the control. They can set the different thresholds, but all the flexibility that they can actually put on the market, can make it as one asset. Those VPPs, they don't want several assets to be connected because it's a burden, and that's why quite many assets owners are left behind the door or taken in with quite steep fees. So that's also one thing that we give. We give the control to the asset owner to be able to trade their assets, even if they don't know how. But the main value that we add is for those traders and VPPs. So how they can connect all the assets, manage all the assets, and make sure that you are bidding on the right market. Because it's also quite difficult to decide, especially intraday, where to put your bids on and then what to do. It's like financial trading. It seems like, okay, it's electricity, why it's so difficult, but it's needed. So yeah. And how to have this kind of one dashboard, easy to connect assets, easy to manage portfolios, very technical stuff, I would say, very self-evident stuff, but not too many software solutions actually give you this kind of control. Everybody focuses on something very specific, but to make sure that all the assets actually work together, this is, again, in a coordinated way, as we want the whole Europe to work. At the moment, in some instances, I feel that some players can't make it work even on a local scale. How we can even discuss then full Europe coordination. Let's make this kind of local stuff right, and then with our help or somebody else, and then start helping Europe. Again, I'm back to this kind of geopolitical stuff. I don't know what's happened to me this morning, but yeah,
something in the coffee. But that makes perfect sense. And maybe if you can dig a little bit deeper into an example of a smaller asset owner, how would they work with or without you as a provider? So how would this bundling of their assets work? And what are the efficiency that they can gain?
Without us, they would most probably use different interfaces that have some interoperability options. So we have seen people using Excel sheets, and it's fine if you do it only once a day. But if you need to do it every 15 minutes, like there is a plan, then it's not possible. You can set rules per asset, but at the same time, you can set rules per portfolio or by the group of the assets. So you set it once and you let it work and you test it, how it works, and then you can adjust it also our algorithm will adjust it to make sure that you get your business results. So it's like having an automated assistant who helps you to understand what is the best, this kind of a setup for you. You have this kind of reprogrammed strategies there, and that is also take into account the specifics of the assets. But at the same time, it's a huge leap when you have done it in different interfaces and through Excel. So yes, maybe a bit of a vague answer, but this is the best one. I think that encapsulates all the possibilities.
Yeah, so we talked about the questions around energy flexibility and also monetization of those assets. What do you think, or what do you feel are the biggest challenges around those? And Martin, how does the platform actually enable people to monetize their flexibility?
I think it's not only about the flexibility, it's how they use their assets. It's on-site optimization between different assets. Then there's price arbitrage. If you still need something from the grid, we make sure that it's done after the optimization. And then the third step is actually participating in all the ancillary markets and all the infrastructure you need for that. So all the MFRR, IFRR, and so on. As you have different rules in different countries, different data sets that needed to be exchanged, that's what we help you with. So you don't need to be proficient in everything in every country, especially when it comes to infrastructure and data sets and how it's managed. We will take care of that. And even if you don't know that specific country, we have done it so much in different countries already. In Europe, we see the patterns already. So we can be also a consultant for you when you're entering a new market, and there you actually can try us out if you are already established VPP in some country. So that's something that I think captures it's the best. So 3 engines: on-site optimization, arbitrage, and then participating in flexibility markets. So the first 2 is more about how to save, and the latter is about how to earn. And as we know, the flexibility markets are super hot at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you.
So one thing is when people talk about or think about flexibility, especially our customers think about it's only using less. So it can be actually using more when it's needed. So again, the demand response doesn't work only in one way. So this is difficult to understand to people, but if you give some examples, then it's easier. If you do it right and you know when the grid needs help, it's not the question about sacrifice anymore. It's how to earn more money. So the ancillary markets are quite hot at the moment. So how to be able to trade there. We have different use cases, different customers. So the customers that only start with on-site optimization, for them it's already quite, let's say, enlightening to see that they can actually group assets and jointly manage them and take control. And then the second group is already the people who have so many assets that it becomes questionable giving away a revenue share to somebody who trades with your assets. But at the same time, you have used the software to do that. So how to break free? And that's quite difficult. And actually, it's not very difficult to migrate, but you need to make sure that you have enough competence, enough people to make it work. Is that something that we also need to educate people that you can have as fancy of a software as you need, but you still need an operator who makes those decisions or who designs those. A team, even if you want to do it 20 in a bigger scale. But still, if you calculate all those labor hours that you need to put in and you add the semi-automated system that we have, or in some cases totally automated, then it still makes more sense than to pay 50% or 30% of the revenue to some aggregator or the portfolio manager. I see the bigger influx of those kind of customers at the moment who have been trading with somebody else, but now see that the amount of money is becoming too big to give away, and looking into how they themselves can take control and be the traders themselves, or at least have the bigger piece of the value chain. So it's less and less maybe preferable to give the whole control away. You kind of need it if you're the B2C customer still, because your asset is so small that you don't have any power and you have power in groups only. But if you talk about how much CNI batteries, CNI production through PV we have installed just in a couple of years, we will be seeing many mid-tier traders or asset owners becoming their own VPPs or taking control of their assets themselves. Why this kind of a neutral software is needed, because quite often you still then give some control away, some revenue share away if you don't do it yourself. And the bigger you get, the more it's wise to actually break free. Yeah.
Indeed. I guess the keywords here are efficiency and scale, right? So the bigger you are, the more incentive you have to be doing your own trading yourself. And that's a key component to be focusing on for sure. And on the other hand, I've been selling software my entire professional career, and what might be the biggest challenge for customers in most cases is that a fresh customer who hasn't used anything is probably an easier customer to educate and onboard than a customer who has used a different type of software and they already have some kind of bias towards that. And then you need to unlearn and re-educate. So what's your take on this? How do you guys do the actual education side of things? And what are the biggest challenges when it comes to passing that information on to your customers?
The biggest challenge is breaking the belief that if it's an energy system, then it's a one big system and you can't have it in modules, or this kind of that if I have this connection to my, I don't know, partner, then how we will migrate those, or this system has all those connections to my old legacy systems, how we will migrate those. So one thing that we are quite proud of is that it doesn't actually matter what systems did you have, what systems do you need, how much you have legacy systems, or how much you have state-of-the-art components. As we are built like in a modular way, we can fit us for this kind of a decision engine or the main portal inside it. And we work with older systems and with newer systems. So this is something that actually comes as a surprise to quite many players that have been using somebody else, because they are used to lock-in, or even if it's not lock-in, then super difficult reintegration. They're quite surprised that you don't need to buy everything. You can buy as you scale specific types of modules. So yeah, maybe it's getting this meaningful discussion is the most difficult, because people fear that, okay, this is another one of those who promises a lot on the PowerPoint, but then I'm again in the same challenges. So one interesting feedback that we have had, and it's really interesting in a sense that it kind of puts a bad perspective on some other players, is that one PV park fund told us that it's so refreshing to actually talk to people who are honest and say if they don't have stuff, but they have a solution how they can make some stuff work with the things that we have. The PowerPoint and actual deliverable is aligned, but it was interesting feedback, yes, that actually I think this is the only way, especially in this difficult energy transition environment that we are and ever-changing rules. So you can't have all the functionality of the legislation that isn't available yet. So it doesn't make sense because you don't have the source code or the source rules even. So yes.
So that's the right way of packaging that. I've seen, many tips and tricks in my life in terms of selling software, and it's always a delicate balance between the actual tech team and the sales team of like what you can promise and not under deliver. So the ideal situation is when you under promise and over deliver, but at the same time you also need to sign the deal. So it's quite tricky to balance the two sides of the coin and making sure that both actually work in tandem.
Yes.
And when it comes to your personal experience, like we didn't talk about this yet. How did you actually end up in the energy flexibility space? What drew you in?
Bigger purpose sounds a bit cliche, but bigger purpose, especially in nowadays, and not only the geopolitical one, but also the sustainability one. How we will sustain our continent, and if you think about it bigger, the whole world. So how to make it happen? Because at the moment it seems so difficult. It can't be done. It's like herding cats. But at the same time, it needs to be done. I have 3 children. So even if I can't make it for myself, I need to make sure that those 3 will have somewhere to live in. So it's not the scourge of the land. So yes, I think this is something that made me change from telecommunication and payments to energy.
That's a great personal motivator. I had another friend of mine on the podcast, Michael Zaff, and he mentioned that his goal is to leave the planet in a better shape than he received it. So that's the objective, and that's the goal of the company. So that's also quite motivational.
Agree. Good quote. I will use it somewhere else.
Sure, for sure. Feel when we talk. So we covered your personal motivation, but maybe can you speak to the team and the company culture of Fusebox? What is the kind of mantra or main philosophy of the company, or what is the objective, and how do you guys keep motivating people within the company?
The first thing is that every person should feel that they have enough autonomy to make decisions, and they don't have this kind of never-ending approval hurdles. Kill all the motivation. If you need, even in a small company, to have 5 approvals for something that you own, you are responsible for, but at the same time, you can't do nothing about it. And how we approach this thing is it's not enough to only tell to people, take the accountability, decide on your own. And then after 2 days to say, you decide this way. It was completely wrong. It didn't follow strategy and so on. But then to empower this kind of decision making and not fall into the example that I just said, is that you need to have very clear understanding what are you doing, what is your end goal, so what are this kind of main aspirations of the company. So it may be very interesting, let's say, for a product to tinker with a very bespoke solution. For a small company, it's just, it's like a hobby. But at the same time, as a product manager, you need to think how to make it scalable. So if you tinker with this kind of corner cases all day long, then can't make it scale. So one thing that we always tell people, and we remind them as much as possible, we are here to create this kind of a neutral layer of scalable SaaS software, meaning that you can't be occupied 80% of your time with corner cases. You need to make sure that 80% of use cases are accounted for. So it goes quite well still, I feel, because as the pain on the market is very real, and then customers can actually speak about what they need, and you can think about how to make it scalable and how to make it a product that actually works and is needed to more people than only one company. This is, let's say, a product perspective, but the same goes for commercial. We can't help all the customers. It just doesn't make sense. If you have, again, 2 corner cases of a question, or you don't, or you want to some things done 100% your way, and you're not willing to let go, then the commercial person needs to be very honest and open and say that even though we don't think it's the best practice you are following, but with this, what you're doing, we can't help you. Again, it's quite difficult to do. Everybody likes revenue, but also you need to understand that we are here to build a scalable model that the whole Europe can use. So it's a bit of a different mindset than catch all the fishes in the sea. So that's maybe 2 good examples. You need to make sure what is the path, and then you need to give enough freedom to people to actually follow that path themselves. You can course correct, but if you go micromanaging, then you end up with 16-hour days, micromanaging everything, and it's totally against the scalable mantra that we have.
For sure. And I mean, I've seen, some of those mistakes done in many companies in the book, for sure. And I think what I typically end up gifting is this book called The 80-20 Principle by Richard Koch. I'll link to it in the show notes as well. It basically applies to everything. So it applies to your personal life, to your business life. Basically, 20% of your customers are probably going to be generating 80% of the revenue, and vice versa. And what you actually said is just you need to focus on what matters and what you can deliver on. And some of those corner cases, they either need to wait or they need to be delivered maybe later in time, because otherwise you can't. If you are trying to serve all the customers all the time, it's not going to work. Something is going to break.
Yes. And in the end, the same customers will be unhappy, and they have wasted time with the provider that won't help them in the end. So I'm sure there is a provider for every problem. So you need to define what is your problem that you're solving. So yeah. Totally agree.
Indeed. And what do you think Europe will look like in 5 years' time, for example, in terms of flexibility, or how will we progress in terms of energy generation, and what would it work like? Will we be better off than we are today?
Yes, most definitely. The market is in pain, 2025 especially, and PV shows that clearly and very well. At the same time, it also, where the pain, usually there's companies that want to provide a solution. So I think we will see more and more this kind of a companies that will help Europe with its transition. And I hear stronger and stronger voices also from the politicians, legislation, and so on to actually start moving. Different lobby groups are going for much higher this kind of storage capacity than we have planned at the moment, because storage is something that should be there to provide a leeway for all the renewables that we have. So even though maybe this kind of talk has been for quite many years now, I see that there is much more urgency now. Only thing that we need to get rid of is this kind of a blame game that we still have. It's convenient. It's much easier to blame somebody in LN post or LinkedIn post than to propose a solution. Then people will start believing it, that there is somebody else that will take control, somebody else that will help to generate more revenue, and the politicians are to blame for not generating enough revenue or not being resilient enough. So that's the change we need. And I see that we as a company are helping with that change. That's why I'm confident that it will be better in 5 years. But a lot of companies will follow our lead, I think, also, because the pain is so huge that one company can't solve it. But we can help to coordinate it. And as I said, the coordination is the key.
It's important. And on that note, what would you guys be looking at? What type of people should reach out to you and Fusebox?
Maybe from the new type of contacts that we see is funds that are managing PV parks and huge PV portfolios. For some reason, in some countries, they still give control to others rather than building up their own capabilities. So this is something that I see growing, but also different classical ICPs like engineering, procurement, and construction companies. More and more, they want to actually have this kind of maintenance agreements for 5-10 years where they are responsible of efficient use of assets. So they need to have some white label software to make it happen. So, and they don't have one object. They have this kind of one project. They have many projects. And to have this kind of white label portal they can use. So also the end customer can see some of the things, then change some of the things, but the EPCs will keep the control and share the value with their end customer. This is something, because if you're not big enough, then maybe you shouldn't trade, but you should make sure that you have enough control of your assets. So yes, the engineering, procurement and construction companies are the ones that also are increasingly demanded to have this maintenance built into their quotes. So you can't just build and then walk away. This kind of mindset is fading, especially in Nordics and in Central Europe. And I'm glad, because it's then less fragmented. It's clearer accountability, not only about revenues, on sustainability also. And also BRPs or companies that planning to become BRPs, they also are somebody who should talk to us, because the problem is that the bigger the company is that you're buying your software from, probably it will be slower, it will be more expensive and less flexible. So if you're starting this business, and I see those companies popping up in every country, then you should talk to us. Let's validate what do you need, what do you want. Then let's talk about what you actually need and find a solution.
Big difference.
Then this is maybe the main three areas. So the PV funds that are thinking about managing their assets themselves, not giving it away to somebody. Then BRPs or aspiring companies that aspire to become BRPs. We will help you to define your path, and EPCs, as I talked, because they are mandated to do so, but at the same time, it's quite a good new revenue source because you're not dependent on the projects only, but you have this kind of recurring revenue source. So those are three. Of course, we have some other companies that we can mention, like aggregators and so on, but those three that I mentioned are the most interesting and booming ones.
Excellent. And on that note, what would be the right way to reach out to you or Fusebox?
I think that the right way, there is no right way, but LinkedIn, just drop me a message and I find the most suitable person based on your needs. We are touring quite a lot, different events in September. We will be in Birmingham in the end of September, plus solar and storage, the event name. Then we will be on the PVSec 2025. I will be personally there also in the end of September. So if you are on events, then we are most probably there. So we will take quite quick turnaround if you want to contact us from there. But yeah, LinkedIn webpage and events.
Excellent. Martin, on that note, I'll make sure to link to all of those three in the show notes below. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. This was quite exciting. I can't wait to do this again, and let's keep in touch.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. See you.